I went to a local youth group, saw a bunch of my peers performing the Passion of the Christ on Good Friday one year. I was 17 years old. And at that point, seeing what Jesus suffered because of my sin acted out before me by a group of my peers, that was what was most impactful for me. So I started to go through and think about all of the sins that I had committed and all the ways that I had fallen short, and the fact that Jesus had to suffer this way for my sins started to really hit different for me. And this was the last time that I went for the altar call, and I actually said the sinner's prayer and believed it in my heart. And things really changed for me. Welcome to Sacred Spills, where we explore the eternal in the everyday. So I thought, as an introduction to this new series about spiritual formation, I would talk a little bit about my testimony and relate it to some thoughts and ideas of St. Augustine. Part of St. Augustine's famous book, Confessions, he walks through his life experience as he's explaining his life message. This process starts to reveal itself. So it's interesting. He tells his story about getting copies of letters from Paul, and it's the teachings of Paul that actually lead Augustine into his relationship with Christ, and the preaching of Ambrose and a couple of other things. So I do have an interest in church history. I think it's fascinating. St. Augustine is writing so early that a lot of his teachings become very foundational and formative for all of Western Christendom, for good or for bad. These things, they are what they are. And when you read a book like Confessions or his Opus Magnus, the City of God, you start to see some of the philosophies and beliefs that have really shaped and defined Western Christendom. And that's super interesting. There's a whole Eastern church. All of the Middle East and Northern Africa were all Christian at some point. So I think it's important for us to recognize and realize both the strengths and the weaknesses, and learn what we can from those that came before us. So Augustine has this process of in, up, out. The first step for me was that inward journey. And I don't know that it has to be that way for everyone. Obviously, God moves in very different ways. But these things are all happening throughout my life and throughout our lives in various ways and to various degrees. But it's that deep, contemplative, existential process that an individual goes through, where you can get caught up and stuck in any of these stages. But for myself, I know that I had to search within my own soul in order to recognize my own sin nature, which led me to the need for a savior and the need for connection with the living God. Augustine's spiritual journey begins with an inward turn. And famously, he chronicles this story in his book Confessions about stealing some figs as a young man, which is really, it's such a minor thing. But for Augustine, decades later, the fact that he did this thing that he knew was wrong while he was doing it made him have to contemplate his own heart and recognize his sin nature. For my own self, I can share that my parents met at church. They had both lived the hippie life of some sorts, and I'm actually recording some of their history and their stories on a different YouTube channel, putting it up. So far, it's really only been my father, but it's been really fun hearing some of the stories of his childhood, and we're going to start getting more into what led him to Christ. So my parents were going to church when they met and fell in love. My father decided to become a minister. He went to school to become a pastor. And I was born during that time. When my father became ordained and they were ministering at the church where they got saved at and where they met at, There were some issues where he was kind of thrust into positions of leadership that he probably wasn't really ready for at this stage of his life. And he became disillusioned with the things that he thought God was going to do and how he was going to do it. There was a disconnect between what my father thought he was signing up for and what he was actually signing up for. And he got very disillusioned and fell away from the church. And there was a very long time when we weren't going to church or anything like this. My mother, for her part, did try to continue talking about God and Jesus and praying with me at night and such like this. But it wasn't a lot of influence in my life. And as I was going to school full time and being immersed in, well, really being immersed in the world that the television had for me, I was watching all kinds of shows for hours and hours and hours, consuming all this media. I didn't have the community of believers that may have provided some support for me and some other adults for me to turn to, some peers to kind of do the Christian life with. I always believed in God and I always thought I was a Christian. So when I met a young man and he was a believer and he was a Christian and he asked if I was, I said, yes, I'm a Christian. But honestly, I hadn't been to church in probably 10 years and I didn't really know what that meant fully. I mean, I believed in God. I believed that Jesus was real. I believe he died for my sins. So in that way, I checked all the boxes for evangelical fire insurance, I guess you want to call it. And over the course of that year, people would stop me and talk to me about Jesus often. It was really within a little more than a 12-month span, maybe 18 months or something like this, where I think I said the sinner's prayer about 17 times, often to just get rid of whoever it was that had stopped me and started talking about Jesus. And I remember the last time that happened. So I started dating this person casually, I thought. And it's a funny thing how there'll be no options in your life and you're just going along and you maybe want a boyfriend and you feel lonely. You think the romantic relationship is going to fill this void in you. So you go around looking for, as an older teen, I was looking for and trying to find some type of relationship, but nothing was materializing. And so, of course, as soon as I started dating this person, a whole bunch of other people started getting interested. I don't understand how that happens, but it seems to be something that happens. So at the time, I thought, oh, well, it's not a big deal if I'm with this person and these other people. And now I was not sexually active, but I was not being faithful. And I think that's an important part of my testimony because the fact that I had been deceitful and cheated on this boyfriend caused me to recognize my sin nature. So fast forward a couple of months, we kind of reconciled and then talked about being actually committed in a monogamous dating relationship. I went to a local youth group with him and saw a bunch of my peers performing the Passion of the Christ on Good Friday one year. I was 17 years old. And at that point, seeing what Jesus suffered because of my sin acted out before me by a group of my peers, that was what was most impactful for me. So I started to go through and think about all of the sins that I had committed and all the ways that I had fallen short. And the fact that Jesus had to suffer this way for my sins started to really hit different for me. And this was the last time that I went for the altar call and I actually said the sinner's prayer and believed it in my heart. And things really changed for me. Scripturally, you become a new creature in Christ when you are born again. This is something that's happening in the spiritual world that it's not tangible. You can't really touch it. This is a reality in the spiritual realm where you go from being a child of the kingdom of darkness and a sinner to being a child of God and a saint. It's actually, you become a saint and you become a temple for the Holy Spirit. So your nature itself changes. This is an important thing as we go forward in the sanctification processes, understanding that you go from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light and you literally change in the spirit realm. You're reborn. Even though you don't necessarily see a physical change, though sometimes the way a person looks and carries themselves and the light in their eyes does physically change. You will see the nuance to these physical changes. More often, it's the effects of the spiritual change that show the transition more than a literal physical change in somebody's material, sensorial presence. When I went from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of heaven, all of the sudden my perspective started to change. Those couple of months leading up to that, I was struggling a lot with, well, like that existential crisis. Who am I? What is my purpose here? Finding my identity. Of course, I was a senior in high school, so that's a very common time for this to be happening. But I found that many of the answers that the world had for my identity were not satisfying. Having my questions not be answered, and in some cases not actually being taken seriously, created a seed of cynicism in my soul. I became very cynical about a lot of things, and I was very unhappy. But I also watched every television show that anyone could watch, and I was volunteering in the junior fire department and a couple other things where I was around a lot of people that were very loose with their tongue, and I was swearing like a truck driver. That, I think, is the biggest external difference in my life at that time, that I was cussing a lot, as they say, potty words, and God really transitioned me to recognize that this is not an appropriate way to communicate with people, and it's not always very kind. And so I started to restructure my sentences and try to talk in ways that were more edifying and glorifying to God. So that was the biggest transition for me. Then, of course, I started to read my Bible, and then I started to journal and stuff like this. And so I went into that process. It was that inward process of recognizing my own sin. Augustine calls the inward journey the homo interior, the inner man, the person who we are internally. And Augustine argues that truth is not found in the external world, but it is accessed through the mind. So in our inward journey, we are connecting with God. The next step Augustine talks about is the divine illumination. Augustine taught that genuine knowledge and understanding require divine illumination. Our intellectual light is merely a likeness of the uncreated light of God. So our intellectual light is a pale reflection of how we are made in the image of God. And this is what is referred to as common grace. We're all children of God in that we are all created by Him, and we are all created in His image. But it is the specific grace and the application of the sacrifice of Jesus that changes us and causes us to grow. So we have that likeness of the uncreated light, is the quote from Augustine. It's not that God puts the ideas in our mind, but that our minds see the truth in the light of God. This is, as Augustine also said, the unalterable truth that is above our minds. For Augustine, he explains in his Confessions about an experience he had with his mother, Monica, who was a believer, and they were raised up as a flame, as he calls it, to contemplate the eternal wisdom of God. So there's that process where he was moving inward, which caused that connection with God to happen, and it pulled him upward into a spiritual understanding that was beyond himself. So as I, over those months, started to recognize my sin nature and started to try and seek from my own experiences and from the world around me some answers, I started to have that illumination of the knowledge of who God was. Of course, at first, those are all the world's answers to try and fill in the gaps or express or explain why we're here and what is our purpose here. What is man? What is his purpose? Why is he here? I've used this example before, but I love it so much, about the counterfeit $12 bill. There's no such thing as a counterfeit $12 bill because nobody would accept it. You need to counterfeit what is an original. So the original is there. We have a pale glimpse of it. And then we use our own understanding and our own intellect to try and explain and answer some of these questions. But there is an original. There is the path to God. There is the pathway to our Creator. This inward and upward journey leads us outward as well. Because where is God? Where is Jesus? He's feeding the sheep. He's connecting with people, leaving the 99 to find the lost soul. I love in the Gospel of John, in the last chapter, Jesus reconnects with Peter and walks him through the denial, the 3-time denial. Peter must have been frustrated. Nothing that he anticipated was going to happen when Messiah arrived actually happened. I mean, he couldn't be more wrong about most of what he thought. And probably all of them, they had these ideas of what they thought Messiah was going to be and what he was going to do. And they must have all been very disillusioned. But Peter in particular, because he said he had the sword and he's ready to charge storm the castle, and he's willing to die with Jesus in battle and glory. And Jesus is asking him to die to self in these ways that are not glorious. Jesus's death is humiliating. Peter can't join him in that process, in that path. At least not at that stage. So he denies him. And of course, once the Lord reveals himself to Peter and the 12 and the others during that interim time after the resurrection, before the ascension, and he visits the disciples while they're fishing. And he talks to Peter those 3 times, and he said, Peter, do you love me? And Peter's like, yeah, of course I love you, And Jesus' response is, feed my sheep. Jesus responds 3 times, if you love me, you'll feed my sheep. I'm feeding the sheep. This is where I am. So needing connection with other believers is super important, and helping to bring those who don't yet understand into a greater understanding of the love of Christ is so very important to our development in our faith. This is what Augustine called, am I going to pronounce it right? Ordo amoris, or rightly ordered love. Virtue for Augustine is a rightly ordered love, where one learns to love God above all things and to love all other created things in the proper relation to God. When we understand and love God correctly, we will do the things that please him and make him happy. He talks about the Our Father, and we went through that on a different episode. But when we want the kingdom of heaven to happen on earth, for earth to reflect and resemble heaven and heavenly order, we must first understand the right order of love. Once we love in the proper order, we're capable of advancing the kingdom in a way that brings glory and honor to him. So again, for myself, I had that inward journey, that upward journey, and then I joined a community of believers. Of course, that person I was dating and myself, we broke up at that time, at least for a time. I started to go to a local church, and I started to be involved in ministry. There's a couple of things that happen when you're ministering and when you're giving back and you're volunteering and you're helping. First, people can be hard. They can be harsh, and they can be difficult. So we get hurt in the process of interacting with other people, both the believers that we're working with and those that we may be trying to minister to. We can get hurt by those people, and that should bring us back to God. We should not be responding in kind to whoever is hurting us. We should bring those hurts to God and ask him to help us figure out how to grow through them and grow despite them. So that drives us inward again. The hurt drives us inward, it drives us upward. And as we get filled with new life and new understanding, we can then go outward again. When we are trying to talk to other people and share the love of Christ with them, we don't always do it well. As a matter of fact, quite often we do it very poorly. And that should drive us to our knees as well. Drive us to our knees, meaning that should lead us to pray. What in me is causing the individuals I'm interacting with to not see and recognize the love of Christ? What needs to change in me in order for me to be more fruitful, in order to help others, and to be pleasing to God? So, helping others, talking to others, communicating with others, building in a community is difficult, it's challenging. This should then lead us to try and grow and learn in the experience, not just because people can be mean and you get hurt, but also because I can be mean and I can hurt others, and I could be doing stuff that is not really pleasing to God. Some things aren't really necessary. Some things are very much a part of the particular community. And then there are some things that are part of the greater community, things that are necessary for people to believe in order to actually call themselves followers of Jesus. Now, anyone could call themselves a follower of Jesus. So I wanted to pull up the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis is a timeless classic. We need to understand and believe those basic foundational things, have those things in common, and that should transcend communities, denominations, even sects within a denomination. That if we believe in those basic tenets together, then we are part of the body of Christ. Individuals who call themselves believers or Christians who don't have those foundational things, which we'll get into. If you don't believe in the virgin birth and the resurrection, you may be a nice person and you may try to do nice things the way that you saw that Jesus did, or you may even have a part of Christian culture that you think is valuable, that you want to emulate, but you aren't truly a follower of Jesus in the sense of knowing and understanding and believing the things that Jesus taught. If you don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God and literally part of the triune God, then are you even really a believer? So those are those kind of foundational things that we'll just talk about and touch on. I'm not sure how deep into doctrine I want to get, but I thought it'd be good, at least for this series, to start with my own walk, where I came from, so people would understand sort of where my beliefs are. I lean toward being a little more charismatic. The first church I went to was very charismatic. Over the years, shifting and moving and growing, I have come in contact with a couple of different types of philosophies and beliefs and theologies. So yeah, if you want to know where I lean on those types of things, I will agree more with people who are pursuing the Spirit of God and the spiritual things than those who might say, when the Bible became canonized, we no longer needed the Spirit of God. I don't see that or believe that that is possible. I don't know that any individual could accept the miracle of salvation if there is no Spirit moving and active and present in the world. There is enough debate and different individuals through church history who have argued on that point that I think it's worth saying. Somebody who might disagree with me on that point is potentially, I mean, it depends on the individual, but potentially still a believer, as someone who loves Jesus and wants to grow in their faith. So this kind of more nuanced ideas are not necessarily as foundational to our Christian beliefs in order to show that we are followers of Jesus. I'm really rambling now. I'm sorry to be going on like this. So that's basically my story about how I became a believer and the foundational parts of how I found my way to the foot of the cross. And that happened in 1994. It was during the Easter season. I hope that you found this interesting. I have to say that this is take 3 for me, which in some ways is a good thing because I feel like I was able to work through some of the thoughts and ideas I had about an episode like this, and I have a little bit more structure to it than I maybe would have my first time through. But it is because of the technical issues that I had that I actually bought this mic, this clunky, very cheap gamer microphone with a boom handle, because I want to plug it in directly to my device. I had a couple of technical issues, and that's part of this podcasting process. And it's been an exciting journey, but having those technical issues has caused me to try and figure out some new things, and it's been a learning process. So I thank you for your patience with me. I was hoping to get this series started a little bit earlier, and it seems like I was on the other series a little bit quicker. There was certain aspects to the process that maybe there were less decisions for me because I decided I'm just going to plod through this book. And so I didn't have to come up with an actual lesson plan and direction for the next step. So I hope you will join me next week when I try to figure out what topics I'll be going through, more specifically about how to grow in your faith and the sanctification process of Christianity. Until then, I hope you enjoy pursuing God with me, and I hope that you remain teachable to Him so that you may grow in your knowledge and understanding of Christ.